Welcome to Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Real Men, Designed for Greatness, a program intended to assist men and ultimately families and communities to live out their call faithfully and courageously as they work to restore, rebuild, and revitalize the culture. I'm your host, John Sablan, and with me is my co-host, Deacon Burke-Sivers. And we welcome you to this episode 10, which is entitled, A Man After God's Own Heart. And these next two episodes is a two-part focus where we'll be looking at four specific virtues. And in this episode, we'll be looking at the virtues of humility and purity. Now, Deacon, these are two fundamental virtues, if you will, that I think primarily men struggle with. I know I, as a man, struggled with both of these, but we know that they're key to growing in holiness and to living out that call as true men of God. You know, we just came off the episode of that universal call to holiness and that call to sainthood. And why would we think in this sense that the idea of humility, the idea of purity, maybe we can start off by defining them first, are necessary to grow in that self-knowledge and grow in that call to holiness?
Well, humility, remember we talked about this a little bit before, means not thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less.
Right.
And it all goes back to that idea of making a gift of yourself to others. Mm-hmm. You know, so especially, I mean, if you're a pastor in a parish or a father in a home, you know, your needs, your wants, your desires, you know, don't necessarily come first. In a sense, you have to crucify those things so that God's will can be fulfilled in your parish or in your family, in your home. You know, so an example again is Jesus. You know, he gives us the model. I have not come to be served, but to serve, and washing the feet of the apostles. Now, why did he do that? You know, the main mode for transportation back in the time of Christ was walking, right? They were a pedestrian society. And they didn't have nice shoes or paved roads. They shared those trade routes with animals. So, you know, camels and donkeys and horses. And so they're walking in pee and poop and ants and dirt and mud. So when you got to someone's house, you didn't just walk into somebody's house with all that stuff on your feet. You know, the servant came and washed your feet. But not just any servant, it was the lowest ranking servant. So that's why when Jesus got to Peter said, "You can't wash my feet," because remember, he knew what that meant.
Right.
And Jesus says, "If I don't wash your feet, you can have no part of me." Jesus was sending a very strong message that headship and leadership and authority is rooted in in service and in humility. Right? You have to humble yourself so that God can be exalted. You know, so it's so oftentimes in a family, for example, you know, you have to crucify your pride in order to reach humility. You know, I know for myself, I remember this. It seems so trivial right now, but this is how it goes, right? I come home from a trip, and my wife usually picks me up from the airport. But sometimes if my flight is late or she's seeing clients, then you know, then I have to take Uber home or whatever. So I get home, and I noticed one day when I got home, the light was on in the van. Because, you know, we have assigned seats for the kids in our minivan, and somebody's light was on. So I said, "Oh man," you know. So when my wife got home, I say, "Hon, you know, I got home and the light was on in the van." She goes, "Oh, you know, I think we went to the store, got groceries, and you know, and the kids were helping with the groceries. I forgot to check to make sure that everybody turned their light off." I said, "Okay." So another time I came home, same thing. Another light was on in the van. And I said, "Hon, you know, light was on in the van again." Because, our thing is when you turn down our street, all the kids turn the lights off so they don't forget. She must have forgot, or Benjamin or one of my son or somebody forgot. So I said, okay. So it happened a third time. Now I'm starting to get upset because I'm thinking the reason I'm bringing this up because I don't want the battery to die, and now I'm gone, and now they got to call AAA and got to get a jump the car and all this kind of stuff. And I just want things to go as smoothly as possible when I'm home. And so the third time I said, "Hon, why does this keep happening? The light's on the van." And then now she gets defensive because now I'm attacking. And she'll say something like, "Well, if you were home more, then maybe the light would be off." I'm like, "Oh, they should bring something from 5 years ago." You know, now I'm like, boom, now you're in it, you know? Yeah. But let me ask you something. That first time, why didn't I just come home, saw the light on, just open the van, turn the light off, and not even bring it up?
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Pride. You see, so that's why humility is important.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, life is so short. And so many times as a working pastorally as a deacon, you work with couples and they come to you arguing and fighting. You know when that stops? When one of them gets sick.
Mm-hmm.
When all of a sudden somebody's diagnosed with cancer, all of a sudden they're getting along better like when they were first married.
Mm-hmm.
Because now all the little stuff doesn't matter. They have to focus on the cancer. See? Mm-hmm. So we should remember humility, treating our spouse, or if you're a priest of the parish or you're single, the way you live in society, as if the people we're dealing with had cancer every day.
Mm-hmm.
And remembering that and living that, I think that's how you live out true humility.
Yeah, that going back to the idea of not thinking less about yourself, but thinking, about yourself less. And I think for us men, we struggle with that issue, right? Because this idea of humility is so closely tied to humiliation. Nobody likes to be humiliated, but that's a vehicle of humility. So we struggle with submitting ourselves to that. We struggle with our pride. We're more about being right than being righteous, right? So going in and not turning off the light, doing acts of quote unquote charity, but really expecting a response. So it's really false charity. So we struggle with that, but not really contemplating. You bring up a point of contemplating death. If life was to end today, or with given a certain circumstance, if I've all of a sudden I lost my wife or my children, would it even matter? Would that job matter anymore? Would that house matter anymore? Would that golf game matter anymore? Whatever it is that you think is a priority in your life, would it even matter anymore? I don't think we contemplate death enough. We don't contemplate those big things in life because it'll happen sooner or later, where if you haven't experienced tragedy and suffering, different degrees, something is going to happen to call your attention to where you really stand before God and for yourself and for other people in your life that matter. This idea of meditating on your own deathbed. Who will be there and why.
Exactly.
It isn't going to be the stakeholders that you're making money for all of a sudden at your side, or the big sale that you made, or the golf course executives because you spent so much time there. Whatever it is, it's really who you want at your bedside are going to be your wife, your children, or the ones you love most, whoever that may be. But I think for us men, we struggle with that humility piece. We really struggle with the ability to submit ourselves and to crucify ourselves, to die to ourselves, to die to pride, in order for us to better serve our families and to serve the people around us, to serve God.
I think we have to recognize the fact as men that God is speaking through us, and God is using us as instruments. Mm-hmm. I kind of think of what I do as kind of an instrument for God. And I think all men should think of what they do and how they fulfill their call and their mission in life as instruments. God is a musician. And we have to give him permission to use us. And in order to do that, you have to live this life of humility, because what you're saying is God is first, and I am placing myself in the service of God. Just like the Lord, again, the perfect example is Jesus Christ, right? And the agony in the garden. Lord, if there's another way we can do this, let me know now.
Right.
Because Jesus knew what was coming. He knew of the intensity of the pain. He knew that the next day he would be dead. But he said, but his final, not as I would have it, Father, but as you, not my will, but thy will. That concept is so important that when the apostles asked him how to pray, he included it in the Our Father.
Yeah.
About giving our wills over to God. And that's really what humility is, when God uses us as his instruments of his love and his mercy, to be vehicles. And that's not a sign of weakness. I mean, Jesus was humiliated all the way to the cross. So remember, if you look at how they did crucifixions, he was crucified naked. Now, of course, we throw a loincloth for because we give dignity to our Lord. But if you study what it had crucifixion, because they not only wanted to embarrass the pain, to maximize the pain, they wanted to maximize the embarrassment. Right. So Jesus was naked along with the other two guys on the cross. So if Jesus can do that for us, and if we really want to be the men that God created and called us to be, if we really want to find the true joy, not just the happiness, but the joy of the Lord that we hear so much about, I think humility is going to be a vitally important virtue for us men to be able to live out every single day. And sometimes it's going to be hard to do that.
Oh, yeah.
But Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me, not put it down when it gets heavy.
Right.
Little victories every day. Once Jesus made his way to the cross, but one step. And sometimes we need to do that in our life. Just put one step in front of the other. I'm not going to take that drink today. I'm not going to look at porn today. One step. And you build on that, what came before. And you access the grace. And you keep going to the Eucharist. You keep going to confession. And every day you build that virtue. You build that strength to really answer the call to holiness.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to be able to tie humility to is this idea of self-knowledge, right? I think it was St. Thomas Aquinas who said that the first step towards holiness is self-knowledge. The first step towards self-knowledge is humility. That connection between the two that, because pride, essentially we're all battle-tested with that and tempted with that, kind of rules our life sometimes. Humility becomes that opposite virtue for that vice in order for us to understand really where our blind spots are, where we struggle with whatever those fleshful passions may be, where we're concerned more about being right than righteous. So humility becomes that virtue that helps us. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And you see, it goes back to what we talked about, I think early on in the series, we talked about what happens in 2 Corinthians with Paul, right? Mm-hmm. He's given some kind of burden or some kind of pain or some kind of thorn in his side. I'm not sure what exactly is going on. And so he's trying to figure out, well, what is God saying through this pain? What is God saying through this cross that I've been given? It says, my power is made perfect through weakness. Therefore, I'm content with weakness, with hardships, with calamities, because when I'm weak, it is then that I am strong. And that's what humility is that weakness, and recognize that we have to rely on the strength of Christ. In fact, the word in Greek that they use for weakness is the same word they use for a crack in a pillar. Like the pillar is not going to fall down, but it's been weakened. Mm-hmm. And what we have to recognize is that we are weakened, we are broken, we are fractured as men. Mm-hmm. And we need the Christ to come in and fill in that crack so we can be strong again, right? Mm-hmm. And that's humility, recognizing I am broken and I need Jesus to help fix this so I can continue on that path toward holiness, to be the man that God created and calls me to be.
Yeah, and I think going back to that idea of filling that crack in that void, where in order for us to grow in holiness, I mean that's the ultimate goal is right that we become saints. Of course, leading those around us, our wives, whomever we're responsible for, to heaven. But we have to be honest before God, because God knows us, right? But that act of humility places our trust in Him. That without Him, we can't do anything. We can't tie our shoes without God. We can't do anything. So all the things that God has afforded us, whether that be our jobs, whatever talents He's given us, that's all a gift. That we're stewards of those gifts. But without humility, right? We go back to what we've been saying all along is that without humility, those gifts are no longer gifts, right? They're things that I've designed for myself, the things that I've created for myself. Those are things that I'm doing, right? Because I don't need God, because I'm in God's place. So humility, I think, allows us to be able to step back from ourselves and really analyze ourselves and be able to start to go, you know what? Just as you pointed out in your situation at home, what kept me from turning on? Because bottom line is 2 minutes into that firefight you're in, right, with Colleen, you're going, whoa, was this really worth it? I mean, seriously, I should have just shut my mouth and turned off those lights and just remind gently those that I love, hey guys, I had to turn off it's been 3 times. I just remember we got to turn that off because I don't want the battery to die.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think, what does it keep us men from doing that? Like I grew up in a home that, as to do as I say, not as I do, and a very authoritative dictatorship, right? So my father ruled with a heavy hand, right? And so there was that servile fear there. I try to take a different approach with my children now, right? Whenever I use the term, by the way, John BC, it's before conversion, right? So, but the John today, as I stand before men, trying to be a man after God's own heart, right? I want to exert and exhibit and demonstrate and show mercy to my children and to gentle reminders. Sometimes those reminders come easy. Another time, it's really difficult. Right, because it's, as parents, we're thinking about these things all along, right? We're planning our day. We both probably are pretty inattentive in that sense where we're like, I need things to happen a certain way. And the minute something goes a degree off, I'm about to lose my mind, right? But humility enables us to go, look, I need to be flexible. I need to be patient and compassionate and kind. And I can still correct and parent. That doesn't mean we all of a sudden stop being a dad, right, and fathering our kids and not worrying about correcting them or guiding them. No, it just means we do so with a loving hand. Jesus Christ, if we're truly trying to be men of God and trying to be imitators of Christ, then we're going to lead with compassion and mercy as he did, right? It doesn't mean we separate truth from love. It doesn't mean that we don't correct and fraternal correction, whether that be with our wives, children, and or other brothers or sisters in Christ. It means that we just lead with mercy. That idea. So I think humility is going to be that fundamental staple of being able to do that.
Exactly. And, we talk about the correction, discipline has the same root word as disciple. Mm-hmm. So when we're disciplining our children, we're actually discipling them. Mm-hmm. And we can't discipline out of anger or out of frustration. Right. We have to help them become. The reason why we're doing this is because you can be a better disciple of Christ. Right. That's the ultimate goal. Of the punishment, whatever that may be. And one thing I think humility also helps to curb that you find this a lot of men is anger. Because if you're in backgrounds like both of us or so many other men that have like strong authoritative or just things going on in the house that just make you angry, mm-hmm. you become a very angry person. How many times have I heard from men that they get so angry at their wives that they just almost want to hit them and they stop themselves? And they say, well, wait a minute, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. The anger just wells up, and you just like, what the? And you have to stop and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why am I so angry? Why is this issue, bringing this out of me? Mm-hmm. And you have to really, I think, honestly stop and say, wait a minute, I have to deal with this. This is not who God calls me to be. Be humble enough to recognize that, to recognize your weaknesses, right. To recognize your triggers, that lead you into sin. Humility helps you to recognize the fact that, as Jesus said, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. He don't mean that for real. Mm-hmm. Cut your hand off. You see guys walking around with no hands or one eye. But he was a rabbi. And so rabbis use a teaching technique called hyperbole, mm-hmm. where they exaggerate a point in order to make a point. And Jesus' point is, whatever it is in your life that's causing you to sin, that's causing you to move away from me, to live life not in accord with my will, you have to cut that out of your life. Mm-hmm. And humility helps you to really take a step back, look at the kind of 30,000-foot view, and to say, you know what? I can't be around this person. Because when I'm around them, it leads me to sin. Mm-hmm. Or I got to stop watching this TV show. Or I've got to, you've got to make a conscious decision to cooperate with that grace and to cut that vice out of your life so you can start living a life of virtue and humility.
Yeah, it obviously humility ends up enabling self-knowledge, self-awareness, right? And then we can practice self-mortification, self-denial better, right? Because I think that's the other piece that it's going to allow for us is to say, okay, I know my weaknesses. Okay, how am I going to address that? Removing those things out of my life, those things that are obstacles to me growing in holiness, in order for me to be, fully present to my family or truly lead them into a life of virtue. Now, the other virtue that we're going to be talking about is also purity. When I bring that topic up or that virtue up, I'm not just talking purity in the sexual sense. I think that's very part of it. But we just talked about, purifying our intentions, purifying our minds, everything that about us to be able to be pure of heart, of course. Going back to your example, right, of, what was my intent of bringing that up to my wife 3 different times? Was the intent truly to guard and protect them? Say, look, I'm just trying to save us from that. Why didn't we lead with that first?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just, of course, purity of body is definitely, especially for us as men, right? Is we are very external. We are very caught up in the external things in life, and we're visual beings in the sense, and we can get caught up in our fleshful passion. So I think that's a big part of it. But let's talk a little bit about purity. I want to start off with a quote from Saint Jose Maria Escriva when he talks about purity. He says, "There is a need for a crusade of manliness and purity to counteract and nullify the savage work of those who think man is a beast. And that crusade is your work." So, this idea of manliness and purity, he didn't separate the two. He said both manliness and purity in order to counteract the work for those who think of us just as man is a beast, that we're pure animals, that we're just instinctive, that we're nothing but a dog, if you will, responding to our own instinctive nature. This idea of St. Jose Maria Escriva just really calling us to say, no, that isn't for the work of the saints. That's for the work of you, me, and everybody else watching.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that, again, for me, I always got to go back to my boy, David.
Yeah.
Now, of course, he had the whole thing with Bathsheba, which is a made-for-TV movie right there.
Right.
He had everything that a king should have. He was successful in battle. I don't think he ever lost a battle, ever. And his troops were out fighting. He's standing on the balcony. He sees Bathsheba. He he calls his boy, "Hey, who's that?" "Oh, that's Uriah's wife." Yeah, bring her up here. Sleeps with her. She gets pregnant. Brings Uriah back. Tries to get Uriah to go and be with his wife so that the pregnancy looks like it was from her husband. Uriah, of course, because he's a soldier in the midst of battle, is not supposed to engage in any conjugal acts or anything like that. So he tries to get him drunk, and still he refuses. So he sends a note and tells the general, put him up front so he can get killed. So he's a war hero. So David was an adulterer and a murderer. But still, acts of the apostles, he's called a man after God's own heart. And how does he, when he comes back to himself, right? And so many men are in that position right now. They're David. But what did David do? He acknowledged his sinfulness before God. And then out of that came Psalm 51, where he says, "A pure heart create for me, O God. Put a steadfast spirit within me." So this pure heart. Now remember, the heart was the place for the Israelites, wasn't just an organ that pumped blood through your body. The heart was the seat of the will. The heart was the place where your desire for God lives inside of you. That's the so it's not just physical, but a purity of heart. So Lord, where your will, where your desire resides in me, help me to make that clean. Help me to make that virtuous, because that is the offering of my life to you. That's the purity that I think that we want to get at.
Yeah, going to the gospel, Jesus says, "From the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks." Right. This idea where the evil is coming from the internal. Right. So that idea of purity of heart, purity of mind, purity of soul, purity of intentions for us men, it begins with that relationship, that covenantal relationship with God, right? Recognizing that we were created, again, going back to His image, His likeness, and how are we living a life that's consistent and congruent with that reality, And I think that's we entitled this as becoming a man after God's own heart. Of course, the story of David, and he's a great example. He's a great figure in the Bible. But he's also a broken, fallen man as well. Yes. And so when the men are out there and they're thinking, well, I can't do this. Again, going back to it, you keep bringing up, okay, the model's Jesus, and I'm not you, John. I'm not you, Deacon Harold. I don't have it in me. No, we're talking about the same man who defeated Goliath, right? But he put his trust in God. We talk about a man who should have been out fighting a battle with his troops, but was over here lollygagging and got himself into some trouble. And so we can all experience those failures together, but recognize that we're called to a higher calling. And without humility, without purity, how are we going to do that?
Well, men, I think a lot of men aren't challenged.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in their heart, they know that, I should be at church with the family, not watching the football game right now. I know I got to, step it up and be, a better husband. I should be with the kids' game. I should be praying with my wife. They know it, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
So I think this idea of humility and purity living out of those virtues, I think helps men get off the dime, And I think even humbling himself enough to say, I need to go to the men's group. These guys keep inviting me to go. Yeah, I keep making excuses for not to go. You know what? Let today be the day I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And just make that effort, and when they go, it's, oh, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And they go the next week and the next week and the next week to make that commitment, to really make, because again, we've become lazy, we've become timid because we're listening to the culture instead of listening to the voice of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I think when we start to live these virtues, as you talked about, and really make ourselves, in a sense, accountable, mm-hmm. and open ourselves in reconciliation, do all the things that we've been talking about throughout the series, I think that really helps men to recognize the fact that, you know what, I need to step this up.
Yeah.
If I'm just kind of cruising, I'm in cruise control. I just lock it down and I just exist and don't live.
Yeah.
They just exist and they're not living. So I really believe with all my heart that if men truly began to recognize this reality and just made the small step, that next step, that next effort, the next time a guy invites you to the men's conference, I'm like, go. Mm-hmm. Don't make excuses, just go. Mm-hmm. I'm sure your wife will support you.
Yeah.
And just be open to what God wants to say to you.
Yeah. So, Deacon, on that, moving forward, we're going to be talking about these next two virtues, primarily being around courage and sacrifice. And I think, we sequence these appropriately to say, look, it's going to take humility and purity first in order for us to truly be courageous and sacrificial men. So, just want to encourage the men out there as we continue on this journey to, allow yourself to be vulnerable, to seek the grace of God, to allow you to be a humble man, to purify your intentions, your heart, seek Him in the sacraments, seek Him in the prayers we've been talking about. And as we continue this journey, we'll talk about what it's going to take to get there practically, what it looks like to be a courageous and sacrificial man. And we look forward to continuing this journey with you, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World Podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.